Puts me so much trouble, it's not my fault. All this I also lose my friends, I lost my baby. That is looking crack, only today want to change. He wanted us, so they couldn't try more like to feel. I'd kill the grill, take your life in a second. The table drinks coffee in my kitchen, I mentioned eating every song, I just wanted to go away. You decide to stay in the well. I want to be forgiven, I don't like this kid for money. Sorry I was scared, you're not the way it feels. Like to sleep with it for someone to come in and kill you. The final thing is that now I'm not afraid of anything. Cause they're gonna kill anyone that feels so powerful. They try by you every new skin of everything is confusing. You will be good but you will be more. You will be good but you will be more. You will be good but you will be more. Alone every day it is a praise of pleasure.
Good morning and welcome to Dynasty 365, where the film will set you free. Today we're going to be discussing Drew Lock, the quarterback drafted 42nd overall to the Denver Broncos this year, and the situation that he finds himself in. The Broncos' leading receiver last year was Emmanuel Sanders, who is going to be 32 this season. He's very good. He's a good route runner, athletic, can play in the slot and on the perimeter. He unfortunately tore his Achilles during practice last year, right before week 13. According to the reports, he's apparently on schedule in his recovery, but it is an unknown how he's going to look after recovering from this injury at the advanced age of 32. Last year, he was averaging 8.2 targets per game, and if he wouldn't have gotten hurt, that would have been a pace of 131 targets, 95 catches, 1,200 yards, and 5 touchdowns. He got hurt for 4 games in 2017 as well, but his 4-year average, so I'm counting post-Peyton Manning only and adjusting for injury, is 132 targets, 78 receptions, 1,000 yards, and 5 touchdowns per year. Over those 4 years, he's averaged 13 yards a route, 8 yards a target, 13 yards a touch, and a 62% catch rate. The Broncos also have second-year player Courtland Sutton, who is 24 and was a second-round pick. He is big, agile, and fast, but right now he's pretty much just a jump ball specialist, but he did show quicker than anticipated growth in both his route running and his hands catching consistency last season. I expect him to improve this year on his 5.3 targets per game with 84 total targets, 42 catches, 704 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a 50% catch rate. He should see increased targets this season, and in my opinion will be a great target for Lock to grow with. Last year, they also drafted Deshaun Hamilton in the 4th round, who is 24 and is a good route runner, pretty much solely a slot player. He's quick and fast enough, and he did show very well when Sanders went down, even though he didn't add much after the catch. In the 4-week span where Sanders was hurt and then eventually tore the Achilles, he averaged 9.5 targets a game for 6.3 catches a game, 46 yards per game, and half a touchdown each game. When you look at his season average, it was 3.2 targets per game for 45 total targets, 30 catches, 243 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He averaged 8 yards per route, 5 yards per target, and 8 yards per touch with a 67% catch rate. So even though that 4-game pace numbers look very good, keep in mind that Case Keenum targets the slot far more than most quarterbacks do. Deshaun's going to be the biggest beneficiary if Sanders isn't the same after surgery, and is another great target for Lock to grow with, being only 24 and going into his 2nd season. Another receiver that showed out pretty good last year was Tim Patrick, who's going to be 26 this season. He's a similar player but less athletic than Courtland Sutton, and he made some crazy contested catches last year. He didn't do much the first 12 weeks, but in the last 4 games, he averaged 7.5 targets per game, 4.75 receptions per game, 60 yards per game, but no touchdowns. And in this time period was when Sanders went down, and then 2 weeks later, Deshaun Hamilton went down with injury. Patrick averaged 14 yards per route, 8 yards per target, 13 yards per touch, with a 56% catch rate. Patrick is a solid player. I'm very curious to see how he develops, and is yet another young-ish receiver for Locke to grow with, and his production will be closely tied to Emmanuel Sanders' recovery from his Achilles. Demaryius Thomas was traded away last year in about week 8 and subsequently tore his Achilles later in the year, so that's looking like a good trade for John Elway. And the only receiver added in the draft was Juwan Winfrey out of Colorado in the 6th round, who was a teammate of Philip Lindsay, but I have not scouted his film as of yet. The Broncos' leading tight end last year was Jeff Heuerman, who's going to be 27 this year. He had 48 total targets, and he played 11 games, which gives us 4.4 targets per game, accumulated 31 catches, 281 yards, 2 touchdowns, with 9 yards per route, 6 yards per target, 9 yards per touch, and a 65% catch rate. He is, in my opinion, mediocre, and will almost immediately be usurped by the 20th overall pick in the draft this year, Noah Fant. He was my pre-draft tight end 1 and post-draft tight end 1, staying slightly over 6'4", 249 pounds, 9.75-inch hands, with an 80-inch wingspan. He's also 21.49 years old and is older than only Irv Smith out of the tight ends that I scouted. At the combine, he had the best 40-yard dash, vertical, broad jump, and 3-cone drill of any tight end, running a 4.5-second 40, 39.5-inch vertical, 127-inch broad jump, and a 6.81-second 3-cone. He was the 4th best tight end in the bench, throwing up 20 reps, and the 3rd best tight end in the 20-yard shuttle with a 4.22 second time. Right now, Narrative Street is super underrating his blocking, which I believe is good enough to see meaningful snaps and replace Heuerman immediately. He consistently hands catches, runs decent routes, gets separation with athleticism very easily, but he does need some better blocking form. Once he has a ball in his hands, he shows agility, and he can adjust to off-target throws, is solid in pass protection, but he did show some drops on film. He'll turn a position that's been a liability for several years into a positive matchup for the Broncos. I expect great rapport with Drew Lock, as Drew displayed the ability and affinity to utilize the tight end during his time at Missouri. Troy Fumagalli is a Jag that has 9 fingers, fun fact, and Jake Butt out of Michigan has torn his ACLs multiple times and is essentially a walking medical tent, so I don't expect either of those two to contribute too much. The Broncos' primary running back is Philip Lindsay, who will be 25. Last year, he got 47 targets, 35 catches, 241 yards, and 1 touchdown in 15 games, while only starting 8 of those. In the past game, he averaged 7 yards per route and 5 yards per target with a 75% catch rate. I do expect his receiving role to expand based on his college film and his reported work ethic. The next best receiving back on the Broncos is Devontae Booker, who will be 27. At this point in his career, he's just a receiving specialist who acquired 51 targets for 38 catches last year, racking up 275 yards and no touchdowns. He averaged 7 yards per route, 5 yards per target, and a 75% catch rate. I expect his role to either stay the same or diminish a little if Royce Freeman can improve in that area. Royce was a 3rd-round pick for the Broncos last year and will be only 23 this season. He's a power back that can catch and received 20 targets for 14 catches last year, but for only 72 yards and no touchdowns. This comes out to 5 yards per route, 4 yards per target, but a 70% catch rate, which is respectable. I expect his role to stay the same as it did the second half of last year, where he primarily gave Lindsay rest when he needed it. The quarterback this year for the Broncos, at least to start the season, is Joe Flacco, who will be 34. He was benched for Lamar Jackson last season after suffering a hip injury and starting the first 9 games. He's fairly durable, only losing 2 out of 11 seasons due to an injury, but he's a very sporadic player. On average, he gets 3,500 yards and 19 touchdowns a year. He's probably an upgrade to Keenum. This is where that heuristic gut feeling decision comes in. I just get the feeling his wheels are falling off and he's playing just to keep his job more than he's going to be a significant upgrade over Keenum. I do hope I'm wrong, but that's just the feeling I get. Last year, the Broncos' offense was 19th in passing yards per game, 24th in passing touchdowns per game, 24th in points per game, and 8th in passing attempts per game. The offensive line was 11th in pass protection, but just like the Lions, it seems a little too generous to me. I think that had a lot more to do with Keenum being able to scramble and throw it away or throw contested jump balls than it did actually having a good pass protecting O-line. They were 6th in the NFL in creating yards for the running back, 7th best in power, and top 15 in all the other run metrics. They added Mike Munchak as the offensive line coach, who has been the offensive line coach for the Steelers for several years. We added an early second-round guard in Dalton Risner out of Kansas State, who I really do like, but he does have athletic limitations. In free agency, the Broncos signed right tackle Jawan James, which has been the weakest, most team-killing position for the Broncos for several years in a row. So I really hope he ends up being a long-term solution there. The Broncos also compiled these impressive metrics grades while losing a significant amount of guys to injury towards the end of the year, and we're getting most of those players back, but we are losing one of the best centers in the league in Matt Paradis, which is always a big downgrade for your running attack. Offensively, the Broncos were 22nd in yards per drive, 25th in points per drive, 26th in time of possession per drive, and the 11th most pass-happy team with a 40.1% run percentage, due in part to negative game scripts and bad coaching that luckily was fired. The defense was 22nd in the league in yards per game allowed, 13th in points per game, 21st in rushing yards per game, and 20th in passing yards per game. This also led to a 6-10 record, so I do believe those numbers should be better than they appear, but the offense was not very effective in most games on our side of the ball. Elway added a third-round pass-rushing defensive tackle and a fifth-round pass-rushing linebacker, and both of those seem more like developmental players than instant impact guys. The guys that will make an impact are the free agent signings of Kareem Jackson, who is a safety/corner from the Texans, and Bryce Callahan, who is one of the better slot cornerbacks in the league from the Bears. The Broncos also added 7 undrafted free agents to the defense this year. The Broncos did not address the need for speed at the middle linebacker position, and tight end coverage has been bad and a horrible problem for the Broncos defense for a few years now, and based on the moves they've made, that looks to continue. If there is improvement with this unit, it's going to be because of the coaching changes and those 2 secondary players that were added in free agency. The Broncos' new head coach is Vic Fangio, who is in his first season and has been a long-time defensive coordinator in the NFL and for the Bears for the past several years. Over the last 8 years, he's had a top 15 defense in yards allowed per game in 7 of those 8 years. The new offensive coordinator is Rich Scangarello, who's been the QB coach of the 49ers for the last 2 years, and their second and third string guys looked very serviceable when called up due to injury, which is most likely why he got the job. He is a first-time offensive coordinator, so it's going to be very interesting to see what this offense looks like in 2019. When it comes to Drew Lock, he was my pre-draft quarterback 1 and post-draft quarterback 1. He stands slightly under 6'4" and 228 pounds with a 9-inch hand size and 77-inch wingspan. He's 22.51 years old and had the second best 40 time at 4.69 seconds of any of the quarterbacks I scouted. He did have a below average 31-inch vertical and 112-inch broad jump, but he had a very close second place 7.033 cone drill and the fastest 20-yard shuttle at 4.12 seconds. What I liked about Drew Lock on film was that he reads the entire field, has outstanding ball placement, can throw off balance, and while he's running, he runs options well and makes the correct read, both zone and speed options. The zone option is where you're in shotgun and you have a running back to your side and you're reading that defensive end and just riding the back with the ball. And if that D end crashes, you keep the ball. The speed option, same thing out of shotgun, but instead of having the mesh point right there stationary, you run towards the defensive end and force him to make a decision to tackle you or the running back. And Drew Lock is a very good option quarterback. He will throw while under pressure, has the best throwing mechanics in the class, diagnoses most blitzes pre-snap, can make tight window throws, and those are the types of throws you have to make in the NFL. He made more tight window throws than any other quarterback on film. He only runs when he has to because it's the correct decision to get maximum yardage. He will usually throw the ball away instead of risk an interception, but he does show a gunslinger mentality in a lot of ways. Lock shows good pocket movement and awareness against edge pressure, has fast arm motion and release of the football, amazing deep ball placement and trajectory, makes a correct read of the coverage consistently, has great ball velocity, consistently makes the correct read, and throws into the blitz. Throwing into the blitz is something that's said a lot. Maybe you don't know what it means, but if there are 4 down linemen and only those 4 rush, it's not a blitz. 5 is called a pressure, but it's essentially a blitz. And 6 or more is a blitz, based on my understanding of the definitions of those terms. As a quarterback, there's going to be a hole in the coverage 90% of the time behind that blitzing player, and Locke understands that and typically finds it and throws on time. He also doesn't lose much accuracy when changing his arm angle. So if he's throwing over the top, that means the ball is released over his head. When he throws sidearm, he's releasing it out to the side by his shoulder. And he doesn't show too much variance in his accuracy when he's throwing off platform and at weird arm angles. He does show some, but that's mainly due to his footwork, which we'll get to later. When Locke is running with the football, he also moves the ball to the outside arm. He has high football IQ, and I believe that's due to the experience for playing almost 4 years against SEC defenses nearly every single game. None of these prospects are perfect though, however, and the bad things that Drew Locke did on the field was showing indecision on reads at times that led to late throws. The number one thing I disliked about Locke was that he is a horrible tackler and gives almost no effort tackling the ball carrier when the ball is turned over, so definitely don't draft him in your IDP leagues. He has issues with finding the right ball trajectory to throw around defenders on screens. He underthrows some balls due to fading away. In games when they're down by too much, he has poor body language at times, and definitely needs to work on his play fakes. In college, he didn't take snaps under center. At times, he has poor awareness of the pass rush, and that will lead to him fumbling. His feet mechanics need work, as he typically relies on his arm strength and mechanics there. He will make the incorrect read at times, and sometimes he's too early or too late with the throw. In the pocket, his biggest negative tendency is that he'll drift back too often when there isn't any pressure, leading to inaccurate and low passes. Drew Horsecock Locke has 6 young, promising pass catchers in Sutton, Deshaun, Fant, Patrick, Lindsey, and Booker, and 2 unknowns that could catch footballs next year in Emmanuel Sanders and Royce Freeman. He's behind a good offensive line with a good run game and a good defense. He's got an offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach that did well the last 2 seasons, and Locke has no pressure to start immediately in week 1. Even though he's not starting right away, the only person he's behind is Joe Flacco, who just last season was benched for a rookie that really couldn't throw the ball. I personally don't think that Flacco can make it 16 games as a starter. I would prefer that as a Broncos fan, just to give Locke more time to develop. Locke has the best arm in the draft, the most experience against SEC defenses of any quarterback this year, and for fantasy, he can provide a rushing floor and is athletic enough to gain yards that way. I believe he'll have the longest career of any quarterback in this class and absolutely love his situation. I would have taken him over Murray pre-draft, and I would take him over Murray now. Based on the film and the combine, to me, Locke has the highest upside and the highest floor of any quarterback this year. I cannot believe he lasted a pick 42, but I'm certainly not mad at it. The best thing about Locke is that he's typically going as a 3rd or 4th quarterback in your Superflex and rookie drafts. I really think he's going to end up being the best quarterback in this class when we look back 5 to 10 years down the road. And to be able to get that type of player outside of your first round in a Superflex in a class that's this weak at many other positions is a value that I can't pass up, and you shouldn't either. You'll have to be patient, but Locke will be the starter of the Denver Broncos and has a more impressive set of tools that have already been proven to lead to high fantasy totals and long careers. Tomorrow, we're going to be going over Riley Ridley, who was drafted in the 4th round by the Chicago Bears. Your happy song of the day is Tennessee Whiskey by Chris Stapleton. Your football song of the day is Hate It or Love It, G-Unit Remix by 50 Cent and G-Unit. Just wanted to give thanks to all the supporters out there. I do appreciate the feedback, and I've gotten some pretty cool emails over the past few weeks. So just wanted to say thank you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being open to the possibility that there's a better way to make dynasty decisions than the method that you currently use. I know I'm always trying to improve. It's literally impossible to be correct about every single thing when it comes to Dynasty, but all you can do is put yourself in the best position and the highest probability odds for it to pay off. You've been listening to Dynasty 365, where the film will set you free.
friends of anything, cause they're gonna kill anyone that feels so powerful. They try by you average, your skin of everything is confusing. You will be good, but you will be more. You will be good, but you will be more. You will be good, but you will be more.